The concrete silence. Before we begin, understand this. Some doors are locked for a reason, and some stories were never meant to leave those walls. If you think you can handle what's behind them, go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe. But don't say you weren't warned. The alarm didn't sound like a normal prison alert. It was sharper, longer, urgent enough to make seasoned correctional officers stop mid-step, their instincts kicking in before their minds could catch up. Inside the sterile concrete corridors of ADX Florence, America's only federal Supermax prison, nothing was supposed to go wrong. Not here. Not ever. Yet at exactly 2:13 a.m., something did. Officer Daniel Reyes had worked night shifts for 6 years. He knew the rhythm of this place better than his own heartbeat. The timed lights, the controlled movements, the eerie quiet that wrapped itself around the prison like a suffocating blanket. Inmates here lived in near total isolation, 23 hours a day inside reinforced concrete cells, their only human contact filtered through steel doors and surveillance cameras. No one screamed here. Not unless something was terribly, terribly wrong. Reyes reached Tier D before backup arrived. His boots echoed against the polished floor as he approached cell 214, the source of the alarm. The digital panel outside the cell flickered with a red warning. Unresponsive occupant. That didn't make sense. Every inmate was monitored constantly. Heartbeat sensors, motion detection, cameras. There was no such thing as unresponsive without explanation. Reyes hesitated for half a second before keying in the override code. The steel door slid open with a heavy, mechanical groan. And then silence. Too much silence. The cell was exactly as it should be. A concrete box, a steel bed bolted to the wall, a stainless steel sink, a small slit of reinforced glass that let in a faint sliver of moonlight. Everything was in place, except the man who was supposed to be inside. "Control, this is Reyes," he said, his voice tight, controlled. "Cell 214 is empty." There was a pause on the radio. Not static, something worse. Confusion. "That's not possible," the voice on the other end replied. Reyes stepped further inside, his pulse beginning to climb. "I'm telling you he's gone." The inmate assigned to cell 214 wasn't just anyone. His name was Marcus Hale. And Marcus Hale wasn't supposed to disappear. 3 weeks earlier, Hale had been transferred into ADX Florence under the highest classification level available. Officially, he was labeled a domestic threat with extensive operational knowledge. Unofficially, the rumors were far more unsettling. Some said he used to work for a federal intelligence agency. Others claimed he had orchestrated crimes so precise, so clean, that entire investigative teams couldn't even prove he was involved, until it was too late. But what everyone agreed on was this: Marcus Hale didn't belong with ordinary criminals. He was something else. Detective Laura Bennett first heard his name when she was called in as a federal consultant. Standing in the briefing room, she studied the file projected on the screen, a grainy photo of Hale, his expression unreadable, eyes cold but not empty, calculating, observing. "Walk me through it again," she said. The lead federal agent, Thomas Grady, crossed his arms. Hale was convicted 2 years ago. Financial crimes conspiracy, suspected involvement in multiple coordinated attacks, though we could never prove the last part. "And now he's vanished from the most secure prison in the country?" Bennett asked. Grady nodded grimly. No signs of forced exit. No system breach. Cameras showed nothing unusual. "That's impossible." "Yeah," Grady said quietly. "That's what worries us." Back inside the prison, Reyes retraced his steps. The surveillance footage was pulled immediately. Every second from the last 24 hours was reviewed. Nothing. Hale had been visible in his cell during the last routine check, at 1 a.m. sitting on his bed, motionless, calm. Then, at 2:13 a.m., the alarm triggered. Between those 2 moments, there was no recorded movement, no door opening, no camera glitch, no sign that anything had changed. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. Bennett arrived at ADX Florence before sunrise. The facility loomed against the Colorado landscape like a fortress carved from stone and shadow. Even from the outside, it radiated control, Precision, containment, finality. Inside, it felt colder. Not physically. Psychologically. She walked through the corridors, escorted by Grady, her eyes scanning everything. The cameras, the reinforced doors, the guards stationed at precise intervals. "People don't escape from here," she said. "They don't," Grady replied. "That's why we're not calling it an escape." Bennett stopped. "Then what are you calling it?" Grady looked at her, his expression unreadable. "A disappearance." They reached cell 214. Bennett stepped inside, immediately noticing something the others hadn't. The bed. It was perfectly made. Too perfectly made. "Inmates don't do this," she said. Reyes, standing behind her, frowned. "We don't require them to." Bennett leaned closer, running her fingers along the edge of the thin mattress. No wrinkles. No disturbance. If he was sitting here at 1 a.m., there should be some sign of movement. She turned, scanning the rest of the cell. Then she saw it. A small scratch on the wall, just above the sink. Barely visible unless you knew where to look. "Was this here before?" she asked. Reyes shook his head. "Not that I noticed." Bennett stepped closer, her breath steady, but her mind racing. The scratch wasn't random. It was deliberate. A symbol. 3 vertical lines crossed by a single horizontal mark. Grady stepped in behind her. "What is that?" Bennett didn't answer immediately, because she had seen it before. Not in this prison. Not even in this state. But in a case file she had worked on years ago. One that had never officially been closed. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "It's a signature." Grady's expression tightened. "Of who?" Bennett turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. "Of someone who was supposed to be dead." The room went silent. Outside, the prison continued its routine, controlled, predictable, secure. But inside cell 214, something had broken. Not the walls. Not the locks. Something deeper. Bennett stared back at the symbol, her mind piecing together fragments of a puzzle she had tried to forget. If she was right, then Marcus Hale hadn't escaped. He had been taken, and whoever took him had just left a message. A message that meant this wasn't over. Not even close. But when they ran Hale's full file again, digging deeper than ever before, they found something that made the entire situation far worse. Marcus Hale wasn't his real name, and the man he truly was had been declared dead 5 years ago. And the moment Bennett realized who he really was, she understood something chilling. This wasn't an escape. This was the beginning of something planned, something precise, something that had been waiting for years. And now, it had finally started. The Ghost Protocol. By the time the sun rose over the barren stretch of land surrounding ADX Florence, the prison was already in lockdown. No inmate movement. No external communication. Every system was being combed through, not for failure, but for something far more disturbing. Evidence of intent. Detective Laura Bennett stood in the control room, her eyes fixed on the wall of surveillance monitors, replaying the same uneventful footage over and over again. Marcus Hale, or whoever he really was, had not forced his way out. He hadn't slipped through a blind spot. He hadn't even tried to hide. It was as if the prison itself had allowed him to disappear. "Run it again," Bennett said. A technician hesitated. "That's the 6th time." "Run it again." The footage reset. 1 a.m. Hale sitting on the bed, still a stone, staring slightly off camera. 1:47 a.m. Unchanged. 2:12 a.m. Nothing. 2:13 a.m. The alarm. Empty cell. Bennett leaned closer to the screen, her voice low. "Pause it at 1 o'clock." The image froze. "There," she said, pointing. Grady stepped forward. "What am I looking at?" "Him," Bennett replied. "Look at his eyes." Grady squinted. "He's just staring." "No," Bennett said. "He's not staring. He's tracking something." The room fell quiet. "Tracking what?" Reyes asked. Bennett didn't answer immediately, because whatever Hale had been watching, it wasn't visible on the camera. 2 hours later, a deeper forensic sweep of the prison systems began uncovering anomalies. Not failures. Edits. Subtle, almost invisible manipulations in the data logs. timestamps that were off by fractions of a second, overwritten command signals, micro delays in door lock responses that would never be noticeable in real time. Someone had been inside the system, not hacking it violently, surgically rewriting it. Grady slammed a hand against the table. You're telling me someone got into a federal Supermax system and no one noticed? The lead technician swallowed. Not someone. Something, or someone who knew exactly how to make it look like nothing happened. Bennett crossed her arms. Inside job. The technician shook his head. No login traces. No access credentials. It's like the system executed commands without being told to. Reyes frowned. That's not possible. Bennett's voice cut through the room. It is if the commands were planted in advance. They all turned to her. Like a time trigger, she continued. Something embedded long before Hale ever stepped into that cell. Grady's expression darkened. You're saying this was planned before he was even transferred here? Bennett met his gaze. I'm saying someone knew he would be here. The name buried in Hale's real identity file was one Bennett had hoped never to see again. Elias Voss. 5 years ago, Voss had been at the center of a covert investigation spanning 3 countries and multiple intelligence agencies. Officially, he was a cybersecurity architect. Unofficially, he was something far more dangerous. A strategist. A man who didn't just commit crimes. He designed them like systems. Every move calculated. Every outcome predicted. And when the investigation closed, it ended with one final report. Elias Voss, deceased. Body recovered after a high-speed pursuit ended in a vehicle fire. Case closed. Except, no body was ever positively identified, Bennett said quietly as she stood in the briefing room once again. Grady looked up sharply. What? The remains were too badly burned, she continued. Dental records were inconclusive. DNA was partial at best. They called it a match because they needed closure. Reyes shifted uneasily. So he faked his death. Bennett nodded and disappeared. Grady exhaled slowly, only to get himself arrested years later under a different name. That's the part that doesn't make sense, Bennett admitted. Men like Voss don't get caught by accident. The deeper they dug, the more unsettling the picture became. Marcus Hale's arrest 2 years ago had seemed straightforward, almost too clean. Financial trails, digital footprints, witness statements, everything lined up perfectly. Too perfectly. It's staged, Bennett said, flipping through the files. All of it. Grady frowned. You think he wanted to be caught? I think he needed to be, she replied. Why? Bennett looked up, her voice steady but heavy with implication. Because there's something inside this prison he couldn't access from the outside. The room went still. Reyes shook his head. That's insane. There's nothing in ADX Florence except inmates and concrete. Bennett didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into the file and pulled out a document, one that hadn't been part of the official case. Not nothing, she said. She slid it across the table. Grady picked it up, his eyes scanning the contents. Then his expression changed. What is this? A classified transfer record, Bennett said. 3 months before Hale arrived. Grady's voice dropped. This inmate, he's not in the general registry. Exactly, Bennett said. Reyes leaned in. Who is he? Bennett hesitated for just a moment, because saying the name out loud made it real. Jonathan Crane. The name hit the room like a shockwave. Grady's jaw tightened. That's not possible. Crane wasn't just another inmate. He was a ghost inside the system, a former intelligence operative turned rogue, responsible for leaking classified operations that had destabilized entire regions. He had vanished years ago. No arrest record, no trial, no confirmation he was even alive. Until now. They've been holding him here, Bennett said. Off the books. Reyes took a step back. Why would they hide something like that? Grady answered, his voice grim. Because if Crane talks, governments fall. The implications were immediate and terrifying. If Elias Voss had orchestrated his own capture, if he had manipulated his way into ADX Florence, then it wasn't for escape. It was for access. Access to Jonathan Crane. And now, both of them were gone. Check every cell, Grady ordered. Now, the prison erupted into controlled chaos. Doors opened. Cells were inspected. Inmates were accounted for one by one, until they reached the restricted wing, the section that didn't officially exist. The door required 2 separate authorizations. Grady entered his code. Bennett entered hers. The lock disengaged with a heavy, final click. Inside, the air felt different, colder, still. They moved down the corridor slowly, their footsteps echoing against walls that had never been meant to be acknowledged. Cell K7 stood at the end. Reyes approached the panel. Occupant status, offline. Grady's voice was tight. Open it. The door slid aside, and for a moment, no one moved. The cell wasn't empty. Jonathan Crane was there, sitting on the floor, back against the wall, head tilted slightly forward. Too still. Bennett stepped closer, her instincts already screaming the truth before she reached him. Don't touch anything, she said. But it was already too late. Reyes had stepped inside. Sir, he's not. He stopped, his voice catching in his throat, because Jonathan Crane wasn't just dead. He had been dead for hours, and carved into the concrete wall behind him was the same symbol. 3 vertical lines, crossed by 1. Bennett's chest tightened. No, she whispered. Grady looked at her. What is it? Her voice came out colder than she intended. This wasn't a rescue. She turned slowly, her mind locking onto the only conclusion that made sense. This was a message. Reyes swallowed hard. From who? Bennett's eyes darkened. From Voss. Grady shook his head. Why kill him after going through all that effort to reach him? Bennett didn't answer right away, because something about the scene didn't add up. Not just the symbol, not just the timing, something deeper. She stepped closer to Crane's body, her gaze narrowing. Then she saw it. Crane's hand, clenched tightly around something. Don't move, she said, crouching down carefully. Using a gloved hand, she pried his fingers open. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper. Old, worn, deliberately hidden. Bennett unfolded it slowly. Her eyes scanned the contents. And for the first time since this began, she looked afraid. Grady stepped forward. What does it say? Bennett didn't respond, because written in precise, almost mechanical handwriting were just 5 words. 5 words that changed everything. He's already inside the system. And in that moment, Bennett realized the most dangerous part of this entire operation wasn't the escape. It wasn't the murder. It wasn't even Elias Voss. It was the fact that whatever this plan was, it hadn't just begun. It was already in motion. The system breach. The first failure didn't look like a failure. At 11:42 a.m., 3 hours after Jonathan Crane's body was discovered, a routine system diagnostic flagged a minor delay in the prison's internal network. Less than a second. Barely enough to notice. Under normal circumstances, it would have been ignored. Today, nothing was ignored. Trace it, Bennett said immediately. The technician's fingers flew across the keyboard. It's not originating from outside. Grady leaned forward. Then where? The technician hesitated, as if the answer itself didn't make sense. Inside the system. Bennett felt it before she understood it. That slow, creeping realization that the threat they were chasing wasn't moving away from them. It was moving through them. Show me access points, she said. A map of the prison's digital infrastructure appeared on the screen. Security nodes, surveillance feeds, locking mechanisms, communication channels. Everything was interconnected. Everything was vulnerable. And then, a section of the map flickered. Not violently, not like a glitch, like something breathing. There, Bennett said. The technician zoomed in. A single node was active, unscheduled, unauthorized, alive. Grady's voice hardened. Shut it down. I can't, the technician replied. It's not responding to override commands. Bennett's eyes narrowed. Because it's not external. She stepped closer, her voice dropping into a chilling certainty. It's already embedded. The realization hit all at once. Elias Voss hadn't escaped. Not in the way they understood escape. He had moved from the physical world into the system itself. That's not possible, Reyes said, though his voice lacked conviction. Bennett didn't look at him. You saw the logs, the pre-written commands, the timing. Grady exhaled sharply. You're saying he turned himself into a ghost inside the prison's network. I'm saying he planned for this long before he ever stepped into that cell, Bennett replied. And Crane? Reyes asked. Why kill him? Bennett finally turned, her expression grim. Because Crane wasn't the target. She pointed at the screen. The system is. The node pulsed again, and this time, it spread. One by one, systems began to lag. Door controls, camera feeds, communication lines, not failing, shifting, rewriting themselves in real time. Kill the network, Grady ordered. The technician shook his head frantically. If we shut everything down, we lose control of the doors. Do it. The command was executed. For a moment, everything went dark. No screens, no lights, no sound, just the suffocating silence of a prison built to contain the worst humanity had to offer. Then, the lights came back on. But something was wrong. Very wrong. Every cell door in Tier D was open. Alarms erupted instantly, louder and more chaotic than before. Not controlled. Not precise. Panic. Inmates are out, a voice shouted over the radio. Reyes grabbed his weapon. We've lost containment. Grady turned to Bennett. This is what he wanted. She shook her head. No, this is just the distraction. Because as the prison descended into chaos, Bennett's focus stayed locked on the screen, on the spreading node, on the pattern it was forming. And then she saw it. Not code. Not commands. A shape. The same symbol carved into the wall. 3 vertical lines. Crossed by one. But this time, it wasn't a message. It was a map. Zoom out, she said. The technician obeyed. The symbol expanded, connecting nodes across the entire system. Each line intersecting critical infrastructure points, power, surveillance, communications, external data links. Bennett's breath caught. It's not just inside the prison, she said. Grady's expression darkened. What do you mean? She looked at him, the weight of the truth settling in. It's reaching out. Miles away, in a federal data center, a secure terminal flickered. Then another. Then another. The infection wasn't contained. It was spreading. Back inside ADX Florence, armed response teams flooded the corridors, rounding up disoriented inmates, restoring order piece by piece. But it was already too late. The breach had happened, and it wasn't physical. External connections are live, the technician said, his voice shaking. Whatever this is, it's leaving the facility. Grady slammed his fist against the console. Cut it off. I'm trying. Bennett stepped back, her mind racing faster than the chaos around her. Elias Voss hadn't broken out. He had broken through. Everything, the arrest, the imprisonment, the isolation, it had all been part of the design. A way in, a controlled environment where every variable could be predicted, every weakness mapped. And now, he was no longer contained by walls. Find him, Grady said. Track the signal. The technician worked furiously. I've got a path routing through multiple servers, bouncing locations. Where does it end? Bennett asked. The technician froze. His face went pale. It doesn't, he whispered. Silence fell again. Not the silence of control. The silence of realization. Because there was no single destination. No central hub. No location to shut down. Elias Voss hadn't escaped into the world. He had dissolved into it. Hours later, the prison was back under control. Inmates secured. Systems partially restored. Damage contained. On the surface, it looked like they had survived the worst. But Bennett knew better. She stood alone in cell 214, staring at the faint scratch on the wall, the symbol that had started it all. Behind her, Grady's voice broke the silence. We'll find a way to stop this. Bennett didn't turn. No, she said quietly. We won't. Grady frowned. What are you talking about? She finally looked back at him. Because this was never about stopping something. Her voice was calm, certain, terrifyingly clear. It was about starting it. 3 weeks later, a classified report was filed. Cause of incident: unknown cyber intrusion. Primary suspect: Elias Voss. Status: unconfirmed. Threat level: ongoing. And then, another report came in. This time from a completely different facility. A maximum security prison in another state. A routine check. An inmate found dead in his cell. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just one detail that made it impossible to ignore. Carved into the wall. Beside him. 3 vertical lines. Crossed by one. Bennett stared at the photo, her stomach tightening. Because this time, Elias Voss had never been there. He didn't need to be. And as the realization settled in, one final thought refused to let go. This wasn't a man on the run. This wasn't even a man anymore. It was a system, a pattern, a method that could be executed anywhere by anyone without ever being seen. And somewhere, buried deep inside a network no one could fully trace, the symbol appeared again, silent, patient, spreading. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what comes next.